I was just a kid stranded in a blizzard trying to help a woman stuck on a snowy road. But when Miriam looked at me, her eyes holding secrets she shouldn't share, I felt something shift. What she did next would burn in my memory forever. The snow fell like a relentless veil, transforming the winding mountain road into a blurred white void that seemed to swallow the world. I was 23, barely a year out of community college with a diploma in automotive mechanics tucked in my back pocket, dreaming of a steady job in Denver, but stuck driving my late uncle's rattling Ford pickup through the Rockies toward a job interview in Silverton Falls. The truck's tires, worn and barely suited for this sudden blizzard, groaned against the icy pavement. I'd been on the road for hours, the heater coughing warm air that fogged the windshield, my wipers fighting a losing battle against the snow. Then, through the haze, I spotted twin red glows. Taillights, faint but urgent, like beacons calling me to a stop. I eased the truck to the shoulder of Highway 145, a lonely stretch near Evergreen Ridge where pine trees loomed like silent sentinels and cell service was a faint hope. The cold bit at my knuckles as I grabbed my coat, a faded denim jacket, more style than warmth, and stepped out, the wind slamming into me like a physical force, stinging my face with icy needles. Ahead, a sleek sedan sat half buried in a snowdrift, its rear wheels sunk deep, the hood tilted at an awkward angle. Someone was inside. A shadow hunched over the steering wheel, and my gut told me they needed help. I trudged through the knee-deep snow, my boots sinking with every step, and tapped on the driver's window. The glass rolled down an inch, letting out a puff of warm air and revealing a woman's face. Pale, with sharp cheekbones and eyes wide with a mix of fear and relief. Her dark hair was tucked under a knit hat, dusted with snowflakes that hadn't yet melted. She looked older than me, maybe in her early 40s, her features carrying the weight of experience I hadn't yet earned. "You okay?" I called, my voice nearly lost in the wind's howl. She nodded, but her grip on the wheel said otherwise. "Car spun out. It's stuck. No signal out here." I peered at the tires, buried in the drift like they'd been swallowed whole. "Let me try pushing. Stay inside. It's brutal out here." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for a moment, then nodded, rolling the window back up. I braced myself behind the car, planting my boots as best I could, and leaned into it with all my weight. The sedan rocked slightly, snow crunching under my effort, but the drift held firm, and the tires spun uselessly, spraying powder into my face. My arms burned, my breath came in sharp gasps, and after a few minutes I knew it was hopeless. I waved for her to come out, and she stepped into the storm, pulling a wool scarf tight around her neck, her long coat flapping like a sail. "No good," I said, wiping snow from my eyes. "We need a tow, but in this mess, it could be a while." She scanned the empty road, her face set against the wind, the trees bending under the storm's weight. "My house is about 2 miles up, off a side path near Pine Hollow Lane. There's a landline there. We could make it." 2 miles in this blizzard felt like a death wish, but staying here was worse. Freezing in our cars wasn't an option. "All right," I said, "let's grab what we need and go." Her name was Miriam Hale, she told me as we rummaged through our vehicles. She was a widow, her husband, Thomas, gone 3 years from a sudden heart attack. She ran a small bookstore in Evergreen Ridge, a cozy spot called Lantern Pages that dealt in used novels and hosted local poets. Her voice was steady as she spoke, but there was a quiet ache behind it, like she'd learned to carry her loss without letting it show. I introduced myself as Harlan Voss, Just a guy from Boulder with a toolbox and a job interview stuck on this road by dumb luck. We grabbed essentials, her purse, a blanket from her trunk, my thermos of coffee, and my toolkit just in case, and started walking. The trek was punishing. The snow stung my face, the wind pushing against us like it wanted us gone. Each step sank us deeper, my jeans soaking through, my hands numb despite my gloves. Miriam moved with a quiet determination, her scarf fluttering, her boots carving a path I followed. She was older, sure, but there was a grace to her, a strength in how she pointed out a hidden curve in the road or warned me about an icy patch. I insisted on carrying the heavier bags, and though she argued briefly, her lips twitching with a faint smile, she let me. We spoke in short bursts, saving our breath. She asked about my life, my parents still in Boulder, my sister off at college in California. I learned she had no kids. It had been just her and Thomas in their cabin, a life carved out in the solitude of the mountains. "It's quiet now," she said once, her voice almost lost in the wind, and I caught a flicker of something raw, a loneliness she didn't mean to show. After nearly an hour, my legs aching and my face numb, we saw a faint glow through the trees. Her house, a low cabin with a snow-laden roof and a chimney trailing smoke. "I left the fire going," she said, relief softening her voice as we climbed the porch steps. The air inside hit like a warm embrace, smelling of wood smoke and faint lavender. The living room lined with bookshelves and a stone fireplace crackling steadily. Miriam peeled off her coat, revealing a sweater that clung to her in a way that made me look away fast, my cheeks burning despite the cold. She was striking, high cheekbones, eyes like a stormy sky, a few silver strands in her dark hair that only made her more real, more human. "I'll try the phone," she said, heading to the kitchen. I heard her dial, then sigh as she hung up. "Lines are down. Power's still on, but it's anyone's guess how long." I shed my wet jacket, my boots leaving puddles on the hardwood. "We might be here a while then." She paused, her gaze lingering on me, steady and unreadable. "You will stay with me today," she said. Not a question, but a quiet command, her voice soft but firm, like she'd decided something I couldn't yet understand. The words landed heavy, stirring something in me, a mix of gratitude and unease, like I'd stepped into a story I wasn't ready for. "Thanks, Miriam," I said, my voice catching. "I mean it." She nodded and turned to the stove, setting a kettle to boil. We sat by the fire with tea in mismatched mugs, the silence thick but not uncomfortable. She told me about moving here from Seattle with Thomas, how the bookstore became her anchor after he died. I shared my own uncertainties, job hunts, the pressure to prove myself, the way I felt caught between who I was and who I wanted to be. Her eyes held mine as I spoke, listening in a way that made me feel seen, like my words mattered more than I thought. The storm raged on, the windows rattling, and we filled the afternoon with small tasks. I chopped wood from the shed out back, the wind biting my hands as I swung the axe. When I returned, arms full of logs, Miriam was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew made from whatever she had, canned beans, frozen carrots, a pinch of herbs. "Not fancy," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "but it'll do." We ate at a small oak table, a single candle flickering as the power blinked but held. She asked about my hobbies, fixing cars, hiking when I could afford the time, and I learned she loved old novels, quoting Austen with a quiet smile that felt like a secret shared. There was a loneliness in her, a shadow that matched something in me, though I didn't know what to call it. As night fell, the power flickered out for good, leaving us in the fire's glow. I tended the hearth, adding logs, feeling her eyes on me as I worked. When I stood, our gazes locked, and the room felt smaller, the air charged with something unspoken. She cleared her throat, breaking the moment. "Guest room's upstairs. I'll grab some blankets." I followed her up the creaking stairs, watching her hand tremble on the rail. Was it the cold, or something else? In the guest room, she handed me a quilt, her fingers brushing mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. Then she stepped back, her voice soft. "Good night, Harlan." I lay in bed, the storm's howl filling the silence, my mind racing. Her face, her voice, the way she'd said I'd stay, it all circled in my head, a puzzle I couldn't solve. I told myself it was nothing, just the strangeness of being stranded. But deep down, I felt it. A pull, quiet but relentless, like a tide drawing me somewhere I shouldn't go. You don't know it yet, but this is just the start. What she's holding back will change everything. The storm didn't let up by morning, its howl a constant reminder that the world outside Miriam's cabin was still lost to the blizzard. I woke to the creak of floorboards and the faint glow of firelight seeping under the guest room door, the air sharp with cold despite the heavy quilt draped over me. My boots, still damp from yesterday's trek, sat by the bed, and I could feel the weight of the night before, the way her words, her gaze, had settled into me like a stone in still water. I was 23, a kid with grease-stained hands and a half-formed future, and she was a woman who'd lived through more than I could imagine. The gap between us felt like a warning, but lying there, listening to the storm, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had already shifted, something I wasn't ready to name. I pulled on my flannel shirt and jeans, my movements slow, like I was delaying the moment I'd have to face her again. Downstairs, the living room was warm, the fire crackling steadily, its light dancing across the bookshelves that lined the walls. The air smelled of coffee and wood smoke, and I found Miriam in the kitchen, her back to me as she stirred a pot of oatmeal on the stove. Her hair was in a loose braid, a few strands escaping to frame her neck, and she wore a faded sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder, revealing a sliver of skin that caught the morning light. She was beautiful in a way that felt unfair, natural, unguarded, with a quiet strength that made my chest ache. I guessed she was in her early 40s, maybe 42, from the way she carried herself, the subtle lines around her eyes that spoke of years I hadn't lived. "Morning," I said, my voice rough, still thick with sleep. She turned, her eyes meeting mine with a flicker of something, warmth, maybe, or caution. "Morning, Harlan. Hope you slept all right." "Better than I thought I would," I said, rubbing the back of my neck. "Storm's still going strong, huh?" She nodded, setting a chipped ceramic mug of coffee on the table for me. Checked the phone again. Still nothing. We're on our own for now. I took the coffee, its bitterness grounding me as I sat at the small oak table, the same one where we'd eaten stew last night. Guess we make do then. She sat across from me, her own mug cradled in her hands, her fingers tracing the rim like she was searching for something to hold on to. "I'm not used to having someone here," she said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "It's been just me for so long. Feels different." Her words hung there, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. I wanted to ask what she meant, but her eyes, gray like the storm outside, deep with something unspoken, kept me quiet. We ate in near silence, the clink of spoons against bowls blending with the wind's low moan. The oatmeal was warm, flecked with cinnamon, and it settled the cold that still lingered in my bones. After breakfast, Miriam mentioned the generator in the shed out back. "It's old," she said, pulling on her coat her scarf already dusted with snow from an earlier trip outside. Thomas knew how to coax it along, but I've had to figure it out. Could use your hands, if you're up for it. I nodded, grabbing my jacket, the denim stiff from drying by the fire. The shed was a weathered lean-to behind the cabin, half buried in snow, its door groaning as we pried it open against the wind. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and pine, the generator crouched in a corner amid stacks of firewood and scattered tools. I knelt beside it, my mechanic's instincts kicking in as I checked the fuel line, the oil, the spark plug. Miriam stood close, holding a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dimness. Her breath was visible, curling in the cold, and when I reached for a wrench, our hands brushed, hers steady, mine clumsy from the chill. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt through me, sharp and unignorable, like a spark in dry grass. "Looks solid," I said, standing and wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to shake off the feeling. "Should keep us going if the power cuts out." She nodded, her eyes lingering on me a moment too long, like she was seeing something she hadn't before. "You're good with your hands," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. Not everyone would have stopped to help a stranger. I shrugged, my face warm despite the cold. Just doing what felt right. Her lips twitched, a faint smile that softened her face, making her look younger, less guarded. "That's more than most, Harlan." We headed back inside, the wind shoving at us as we crossed the yard. The power flickered as we stepped into the living room, then died completely, plunging the cabin into a muted glow from the fire. Miriam lit candles, placing them on the coffee table, their flames casting shadows that danced across her face. Her jawline sharp, her lips pressed tight as she thought. I tried not to stare, but it was hard. She was magnetic, not just in how she looked, but in how she moved, like she'd learned to carry her grief without letting it define her. We spent the day keeping busy, as if movement could keep the tension at bay. I cleared snow from the porch, my breath puffing in clouds as I shoveled, while Miriam sorted through a stack of books she'd meant to organize for the bookstore. We talked in bursts, her favorite novels, my disastrous attempt at hiking Mount Evans last summer, how I'd gotten lost for hours and nearly given my mom a heart attack. She laughed at that, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and it felt like a gift, like she'd let me see a piece of her she kept hidden. "You should visit Lantern Pages," she said later, as we sat by the fire, the room lit only by its glow. "It's a good place to lose yourself for a while." "I'd like that," I said, and I meant it. The idea of seeing her again, in her world, felt like a thread I wanted to follow, even if I shouldn't. The afternoon dragged on, and we ran low on firewood. "There's more in the basement," Miriam said, leading me to a narrow staircase behind the kitchen. The basement was a cluttered maze of dust and memory. Cardboard boxes, an old armchair with frayed upholstery, a bicycle with a flat tire propped against the wall. It smelled of earth and forgotten things, and we worked side by side, moving boxes to reach the woodpile. Our shoulders brushed in the tight space, and once, when I lifted a heavy crate, she steadied it, her hand resting on mine. The touch lingered, her fingers warm against my skin, and I felt the air shift, like we were standing on the edge of something dangerous. "Careful," she said, her voice low, but her hand didn't move right away. We carried the wood upstairs, and on the last step, she stumbled, her boot catching on the edge. I grabbed her arm, steadying her, and she laughed, a nervous, breathy sound that made my pulse race. "Thanks," she said, her hand lingering on my sleeve. "You're stronger than you look." "Just used to lugging car parts," I said, my voice steadier than my heart. Her eyes held mine, and for a moment I thought I saw something. Curiosity, maybe, or a question she wasn't asking. Dinner was simple. Pasta with a jar of sauce she'd found in the pantry, the candlelight flickering across the table. We talked about small things, but the conversation turned deeper as the night settled in. She spoke of Thomas, not his death, but the life they'd shared, dancing in the kitchen to old jazz records the way he'd leave notes in her books. I told her about my uncle, how he'd taught me to rebuild an engine, how his voice still echoed in my head when I worked on cars. The words flowed, but beneath them was a current, a pull that grew stronger with every pause. After dinner, we sat on the couch, the fire's warmth wrapping around us. The silence was different now, heavy with things unsaid. Her knee brushed mine, and neither of us moved away. I watched her fingers twist the hem of her sweater, a nervous habit that made her seem younger, more vulnerable. My heart was pounding, and I wanted to say something, anything, to break the tension, but the words wouldn't come. "Harlan," she said suddenly, her voice so soft it barely reached me. "Why did you stop for me? On the road, I mean." I blinked, caught off guard. "I don't know," I said, honest to a fault. "I saw you, and I couldn't just drive by. It didn't feel right." She looked at me, her eyes searching, like she was trying to see past my words. "I'm glad you didn't," she said, and her voice cracked just enough to make my chest tighten. The fire popped, and the room felt too small, the air thick with something I couldn't name. I wanted to reach for her, to close the distance, but I didn't. She was older, a widow, someone whose life was a world apart from mine. Yet the way she looked at me, the way her hand rested so close to mine, made me wonder if she felt it too. She stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "I should check the windows, make sure they're sealed against the draft." I nodded, watching her move across the room, her silhouette sharp against the firelight. My heart was still racing, and I knew we'd crossed a line, even if we hadn't named it. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one building in me. What she does next will break every rule they've both been holding on to, and it'll stay with him forever. The storm held us captive into the second night, its relentless howl a barrier between Miriam's cabin and the world beyond. I woke to darkness, the guest room cold despite the quilt, the only light a faint flicker from the fire downstairs. My mind was heavy with her voice, her eyes, the way she'd looked at me last night, like she was seeing something she wasn't supposed to. I was 23, a kid with a toolbox and a job interview I might not make, stranded in a woman's home who carried a life I couldn't touch. She was 42, I figured from the way she spoke of her years with Thomas, the weight of them etched in the lines around her eyes. The gap between us was a wall, but every moment in this cabin chipped away at it, and I didn't know if I wanted to stop it. I dressed slowly, my flannel shirt wrinkled, my boots still stiff from the snow. Downstairs, the living room glowed with firelight, the air thick with the scent of pine and smoke. Miriam stood by the window, her silhouette sharp against the glass, her braid undone now, her hair falling in soft waves that caught the flames as reflection. She wore a sweater that hugged her frame, and in the dim light she looked both fragile and unyielding, like a tree that had weathered too many storms. The sight of her stirred something in me. Want, yes, but also a quiet ache, like I was trespassing on something sacred. She turned as I entered, her eyes catching mine, steady but guarded. "It's not slowing down," she said, her voice low, tinged with resignation. "Another day, at least." "Could be worse," I said, forcing a half smile, though my heart was already racing. "This place feels Safe? Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, and she crossed the room to the couch, sitting closer than she had yesterday. The air between us was heavy, charged with the weight of last night's unspoken words. We danced around it all day, brushing hands, lingering glances, moments where the silence said more than we dared. Now, with the fire casting shadows across her face, I felt it stronger than ever, a pull that made my chest tight. I noticed a wooden box on the coffee table, one we'd pulled from the basement yesterday. It was carved with delicate swirls, worn but beautiful, out of place among the cabin's practical clutter. "What's in there?" I asked, my voice softer than I meant, like I was afraid to break the moment. She hesitated, her fingers brushing the lid, her eyes distant. "Thomas's things," she said finally. "Letters, mostly. A few photos. I haven't touched it since... a while." I swallowed, sensing the weight of it. "Do you want to open it?" Her gaze flicked to mine, searching, and for a moment I thought she'd say no. But she nodded, almost to herself, and lifted the lid with careful hands. Inside were folded papers, yellowed at the edges, a few faded photographs, and a small silver ring, tarnished but delicate. She pulled out a letter, her fingers trembling, and unfolded it slowly. "He wrote this when we were engaged," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He had a way with words I never did." She read silently, her lips moving faintly, and I saw her eyes glisten, a tear catching the firelight. I wanted to say something, to ease the pain I could feel radiating from her, but words felt clumsy, inadequate. Instead, I reached out, my hand hovering over hers before I let it rest there, light as a breath. She didn't pull away. Her skin was warm, her fingers still, and the moment stretched, the fire's crackle the only sound in the room. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice rough with the effort to keep it steady. "I didn't mean to bring it up." "No," she said quickly, her hand turning under mine, our fingers brushing in a way that sent a shiver through me. "It's good to remember. It's just hard sometimes." I nodded, my throat tight. "I get it. My uncle's toolbox is still in my truck. I can't bring myself to sort through it. Feels like I'd be saying goodbye." Her eyes met mine, and something shifted. Recognition, maybe, or a shared understanding of loss. "You're kind, Harlan," she said, her voice soft but heavy, like she was giving me something rare. "Kinder than you know." The words hit me harder than they should have, warmth spreading through my chest. "I'm just trying to do right," I said, fumbling, my face hot. "That's all." She smiled, small and sad but real, and it made her look younger, like the weight she carried had lifted for a moment. "That's more than most." We sat there, our hands still touching, the box of letters forgotten on the table. The firelight played across her face, catching the curve of her jaw, the way her lips parted slightly as she breathed. I wanted to pull back, to keep things simple, but I couldn't. The air was too thick, the pull too strong, like a current dragging me under. "Harlan," she said, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the fire's crackle. "What are we doing?" My heart stopped, then thudded hard. "I don't know," I said, honest to a fault. I was 23, a kid who fixed cars and chased jobs, and she was a widow with a life I could barely understand. But the way she looked at me, her eyes searching mine, made me feel like I was more than that, just for a moment. She leaned closer, just an inch, but it felt like crossing a canyon. Her breath was warm, her eyes holding mine like she was asking for something, forgiveness maybe, or permission. "This is wrong," she whispered, but her hand tightened around mine, her fingers curling into my palm, contradicting every word. "Is it?" I asked, my voice low, a challenge I didn't know I had in me. I felt reckless, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, but I couldn't step back. She didn't answer, not with words. Her hand moved, her fingers brushing my cheek, light but deliberate, like she was testing the weight of her own courage. My breath caught, and I leaned into her touch, my hand finding her wrist, holding it there. The room shrank, the storm outside fading to a distant hum. It was just us, caught in a moment that felt both inevitable and forbidden. I haven't felt this in so long, she said, her voice breaking, raw with something I couldn't name. I don't know if I'm allowed to. My heart was pounding, but I didn't pull away. You don't have to know, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Just let it be what it is. She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek, and I brushed it away with my thumb, the gesture so simple it broke something in me. She leaned forward, her lips brushing mine, tentative, then deeper, like she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I kissed her back, my hand sliding to the back of her neck, her hair soft against my fingers. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a confession, a surrender, a moment that held everything we hadn't dared to say. But then she pulled back, her breath ragged, her eyes wide with panic. We can't, she said, standing so fast the couch creaked, her hands wrapping around herself like a shield. I'm sorry, Harlan, I shouldn't have. Don't, I said, standing too, my voice sharper than I meant. Don't say you're sorry, not for that. She shook her head, stepping toward the window, her silhouette stark against the glass. You're young, she said, her voice trembling. You have a whole life ahead. I'm not part of that. Her words cut not because they were cruel, but because they were true. I was a kid with a truck and a dream, and she was a woman who'd loved and lost, whose life was rooted in this cabin, in memories I couldn't touch. But standing there, watching her, I didn't care about the reasons we shouldn't. I cared about the way her touch had felt, the way her eyes had held mine, like I was the only thing keeping her afloat. Miriam, I said, crossing the room, stopping just behind her, close enough to feel her warmth, but not touching. I don't know what this is, but it's real. You feel it too, don't you? She didn't turn, but her shoulders tensed, her hand clutching the curtain so tight her knuckles whitened. It doesn't matter what I feel, she said, her voice barely a whisper. It's not right, not for you. Let me decide that, I said, softer now, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. Just don't shut me out. She turned then, her eyes meeting mine, and I saw everything. Fear, longing, guilt, hope, all tangled together. For a long moment we just stood there, the fire's glow wrapping us in its light. Then she reached out, her hand finding mine, and she squeezed it, hard, like she was holding on to something she knew she'd have to let go. We didn't kiss again, didn't speak of it. We sat on the couch, her hand in mine, the silence between us alive with everything we couldn't say. The fire burned low, and when we finally went to our separate rooms, the air was different, fragile, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I lay awake, her touch lingering on my skin, knowing that whatever happened tomorrow, this night had carved something into me I'd never shake. As I drifted toward sleep, I heard her footsteps pause outside my door, a heartbeat of hesitation, before they faded down the hall. And I knew, whatever came next, we'd both been changed.